The first snowflake that landed on Clara Owens's nose felt like a bad omen, but she had no choice except to keep walking down the frozen mountain path with her basket of laundry pressing against her hip. Winter had come early to Salida, Colorado in the year 1884, and the snow had already started piling up in drifts that made every journey from her small cabin to town feel like a battle she was destined to lose. Her husband had been dead for 3 months now, killed in a mining accident that left her with nothing but debts and a roof that leaked when the wind blew hard enough. She was 22 years old and felt ancient. The path from her cabin wound down through a thick stand of pine trees before opening up to the main road that led into town. It was barely wide enough for a single person, and when the snow came, it became nearly impassable. That morning, she had spent an hour clearing enough of it just to make the walk possible, her back aching and her hands raw despite the threadbare gloves she wore. The laundry she carried belonged to Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, who paid her 50 cents to wash and press her fine dresses. It was not much, but it was enough to buy flour and beans for another week. Clara did not see the man watching her from the ridge above, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air as he stood perfectly still among the trees. Isaac Orion had been trapping in these mountains for 5 years, and he knew every path, every stream, every hidden valley within 20 miles of Salida. He had seen the woman before, noticed her struggling with the snow, noticed the way she set her jaw and kept going even when the drifts reached her knees. He was a solitary man by nature, standing well over 6 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown elk without complaint. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, and his beard was thick and well kept despite his isolation. His arms were corded with muscle from years of hard work, and his hands were scarred from traps and knives and the general violence of wilderness living. He watched Clara slip on a patch of ice, catch herself, and keep walking. Something in his chest tightened. He had not spoken to a woman in months, had not felt the need for company beyond his horse and the occasional visit to town for supplies. But there was something about her determination, the way she refused to give up despite the odds stacked against her, that made him want to help. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn as she always did, dreading the task of clearing her path again. The snow had fallen steadily through the night, and she knew it would be even worse than yesterday. She pulled on her coat, wrapped a shawl around her head, and stepped outside with her shovel. But when she reached the edge of her porch, she stopped dead in her tracks. The path was clear. Not just passable, but completely cleared, the snow piled neatly on either side in banks that were taller than she was. The work must have taken hours, and the job was done with a precision that spoke of strength and skill. She looked around, her breath catching in her throat, but saw no one. The forest was silent except for the whisper of wind through the pines. Clara stood there for a long moment, unsure what to think. Salida was not a large town, but it was big enough that she did not know everyone, especially the men who lived up in the mountains. She had heard stories about trappers and prospectors, wild men who preferred solitude to society. The thought that one of them might be watching her should have frightened her, but instead she felt something else: gratitude, relief, and underneath it all, a curiosity she could not quite name. She made the walk to town in half the time it usually took, and when she returned that evening, the path was still clear. It snowed again that night, and the next morning, once again, the path had been cleared before she woke. This continued for a week. Every morning, no matter how much snow had fallen, the path was clear. Clara began waking earlier, hoping to catch whoever was doing this, but she never saw anyone. Once, she thought she glimpsed a figure moving through the trees, tall and broad-shouldered, but when she looked again, There was nothing. On the 8th morning, she decided to wait. She dressed warmly, made herself a cup of weak tea, and sat by her window in the darkness before dawn. The snow was falling again, thick and heavy, and she watched it accumulate on her path. She fought to keep her eyes open, her body exhausted from the constant work of survival, but she was determined. Just as the sky began to lighten from black to gray, she saw him. He emerged from the forest like a part of it, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for a man of his size. He carried a shovel over one shoulder, and even from a distance, she could see the power in his frame. He wore a heavy coat made of bearskin, and his dark hair was pulled back from his face. He moved down her path with steady, efficient strokes, clearing the snow as easily as if it weighed nothing. Clara's heart began to pound. She should have been afraid, she knew. A strange man coming to her property in the dark, watching her, doing things without her knowledge or permission. But as she watched him work, saw the care he took to make the banks even, to ensure the path was wide enough for her to walk comfortably, she felt no fear, only wonder. When he finished, he stood for a moment looking toward her cabin. She held her breath, pressing herself back from the window, though she knew he could not see her in the darkness. Then he turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing as silently as he had come. Clara did not know what to do. The proper thing would be to report this to the sheriff, to tell someone that a strange man was coming to her property. But the thought of doing so made her stomach twist. He had done nothing but help her. He had asked for nothing in return. And if the sheriff ran him off, she would be back to struggling through the snow alone. She decided to leave him a gift. It was all she could think to do. She baked bread that afternoon, using precious flour she could barely afford to spare, and wrapped it in a clean cloth. Before dawn the next morning, she placed it at the end of her path with a note that simply said, "Thank you." When she checked an hour later, both the bread and the note were gone. Isaac sat in his cabin that evening, the bread on the table in front of him. It was the best thing he had tasted in months, maybe years. He lived on game and whatever supplies he could pack in from town, and the idea of fresh bread, still slightly warm when he found it, made something ache in his chest. He unfolded the note and read it again, studying the careful handwriting. Her hand was educated, refined. She had not been raised to this hardscrabble life. He knew he should stop. Knew that what he was doing was strange, probably frightening to her once she figured it out. But he could not seem to help himself. Every morning he woke in the dark and made his way down to her cabin, and every morning he cleared her path. It had become a ritual, something that gave shape to his days. He told himself it was just kindness, just one human helping another. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He had been alone for so long, had chosen solitude after too many years of disappointment and betrayal. He had grown up in Boston, the son of a wealthy merchant who expected him to follow in his footsteps. But Isaac had always felt trapped by that life, suffocated by the expectations and the endless social games. When he turned 20, he had left it all behind, heading west to find something real. That had been 8 years ago, and he had never regretted his choice. But there were moments, long winter nights when the wind howled outside his cabin, when he felt the weight of his isolation. Seeing Clara had changed something in him. Watching her struggle and persist, seeing her refuse to give up despite the odds, had awakened something he thought he had buried. He wanted to know her, wanted to hear her voice, learn her story, understand what had brought her to this mountain and left her here alone. But he was a mountain man, rough and uncivilized, and she was clearly a woman of refinement fallen on hard times. What could he possibly have to offer her beyond cleared snow? Clara found herself thinking about him constantly. She had taken to calling him her guardian in her mind, though she knew that was foolish and romantic. She knew nothing about him, except that he was strong and kind and apparently determined to help her without asking for anything in return. In the 3 months since her husband's death, she had felt utterly alone in the world. Her family was back in Pennsylvania, too far away and too poor to help. She had no close friends in Salida, just the women who hired her to do their laundry and the shopkeepers who extended her small amounts of credit. The idea that someone was looking out for her, even in this small way, made her feel less alone. She began leaving him gifts regularly. Another loaf of bread, a pot of stew. Once, a pair of wool socks she had knitted from yarn she found in her husband's things. Each time the gifts disappeared and each morning her path was clear. Winter deepened. The snow fell heavier and more frequently, and the temperature dropped until even the inside of her cabin felt like ice, despite the fire she kept burning. Clara's work became scarcer as fewer people wanted to venture out, and she began to worry seriously about how she would survive until spring. She had sold everything of value she owned except her wedding ring, and she was considering selling that too, though the thought made her want to weep. One morning in late January, she woke to find not just her path cleared, but a cord of firewood stacked neatly beside her door. She stood staring at it, her eyes filling with tears. Firewood was expensive, and she had been rationing her supply carefully, knowing it would not last the winter. This wood was good and dry, split perfectly, enough to keep her warm for weeks. She sat down on her porch steps, not caring that the cold seeped through her skirt, and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of not being completely alone. Someone cared whether she lived or died. Someone was watching over her. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty forest. "Thank you." From his position in the trees, Isaac heard her. His chest tightened, and he had to fight the urge to go to her, to tell her she did not have to thank him, that helping her had become as necessary to him as breathing. But he stayed hidden, watching until she went back inside, his hands clenched at his sides. February came, bringing with it a blizzard that lasted 3 days. Clara huddled in her cabin, her fire burning low as she tried to conserve wood, wondering if her guardian could even reach her through the storm. On the 3rd morning, when the wind finally died down, she opened her door to find not only her path cleared but a haunch of venison hanging from her porch beam, wrapped in cloth to protect it from the snow. That was when she decided she had to meet him. She could not continue this strange, silent relationship. She needed to see his face, to hear his voice, to thank him properly and understand why he was doing this. She began staying up later, watching from her window. She tried waiting outside, but the cold drove her back in after an hour. He was too clever, too skilled at moving unseen. Finally, she decided on a different approach. She wrote him a letter. It took her all evening, draft after draft, trying to find the right words. Finally, she settled on something simple and honest. "Dear friend, you have been so kind to me, and I do not even know your name. I would like to thank you properly and to know who has been my guardian through this terrible winter. If you are willing, please knock on my door tomorrow evening at sunset. I will make a supper. If you do not wish to meet, I understand, but know that your kindness has meant more to me than I can express. With deepest gratitude, Clara Owens." She left the letter at the end of her path, weighted down with a stone. Then she went inside and waited, her heart pounding. Isaac found the letter at dawn as he came to clear her path. He read it 3 times, standing in the snow, the words blurring slightly in the gray light. She wanted to meet him. She wanted to thank him. She had signed her name, Clara Owens, and just seeing it written in her hand made his pulse quicken. He should refuse, should leave the letter and never come back. He was not the kind of man who belonged in a woman's parlor, drinking tea and making polite conversation. He was rough and scarred and probably half wild by civilized standards. But the thought of finally speaking to her, of seeing her face up close, of hearing her voice directed at him, was too tempting to resist. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. Then he cleared her path, as he always did, and headed back to his cabin to prepare. Clara spent the day in a state of nervous excitement. She cleaned her small cabin until it gleamed, used the last of her coffee to make a fresh pot, and prepared a stew with the venison he had given her, adding the last of her potatoes and carrots. She combed her hair and pinned it up neatly, then changed her dress twice before settling on her best one, a simple blue wool that had been her Sunday dress before her husband died. It was worn but clean, and it brought out the color of her eyes. As the sun began to set, painting the snow orange and pink, she sat by her fire and tried to calm her racing thoughts. What if he did not come? What if he was frightened away by her forwardness? What if he came and was not at all what she imagined? The knock, when it came, was so quiet she almost missed it. She jumped up, smoothed her skirt, and went to the door. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the handle. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. He was even larger than he had seemed from a distance, his shoulders filling her doorway, his head nearly touching the frame. His face was all hard planes and angles, weathered by sun and wind, with a strong jaw covered by a neatly trimmed beard. But it was his eyes that caught her. They were a deep brown, warm and intelligent and kind. They were the eyes of a man who had seen much and judged little. "Miss Owens," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough from disuse. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "I am Isaac Orion. Thank you for your invitation." "Mr. Orion," she said, finding her voice. "Please come in. You must be frozen." He hesitated for just a moment, then ducked his head and stepped inside. The cabin immediately felt smaller with him in it, his presence filling the space. He looked around, taking in the sparse furnishings, the threadbare curtains, the signs of genteel poverty everywhere. Then his eyes came back to her, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the table. "I made stew. It is not much, but I wanted to thank you properly." Isaac sat carefully in the chair, which creaked under his weight. "You do not need to thank me," he said. "I was happy to help." "But why?" Clara asked, ladling stew into 2 bowls. "You do not know me. Why have you been doing all of this?" Isaac accepted the bowl, his large hands making it look small. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I saw you struggling," he said finally. "That first day I saw you trying to clear your path, and I could see how hard it was for you. I just wanted to help. It did not seem right for you to have to fight that battle alone every day." Clara sat down across from him, her own stew forgotten. "You have been doing it every day for over a month. That is more than just helping. That is true kindness." Isaac looked down at his bowl, uncomfortable with the praise. "I live alone," he said. "Have for years. It was good to have a purpose, I suppose, something beyond just surviving another winter." "Where are you from?" Clara asked. "You do not sound like most of the mountain men I have heard speak." A slight smile touched his lips. "Boston. My family is there still, I imagine. Merchants and society folk. I left when I was 20, could not stand it anymore. All the pretense and expectation. I wanted something real." "And you found it in these mountains." "I found peace," Isaac said. "Found a way to live that made sense to me. But it is a lonely life sometimes." Clara understood that. "I am from Pennsylvania," she said. "A small town outside Philadelphia. My father was a teacher. I came here with my husband 2 years ago. He thought he would make his fortune in the silver mines." She paused, her throat tightening. "He died in a collapse 3 months ago." Isaac's expression softened. "I am sorry." "He was not a bad man," Clara said quietly. just a dreamer. He wanted to give me a better life, but instead he left me with nothing but debts in this cabin." She looked up at Isaac, her blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "If it were not for you, I do not know how I would have made it through this winter." "You would have," Isaac said with certainty. "You are stronger than you know. I have watched you, seen the way you keep going no matter what." "You do not need me." "Maybe not," Clara said, "but having you has made all the difference." They ate together, the silence comfortable now. Isaac told her about his life in the mountains, about trapping and hunting, about the beauty of the wilderness in all seasons. Clara told him about the laundry she took in, about her dreams of maybe starting a small school once she got back on her feet, about the books she still owned and reread constantly because she could not afford new ones. As the evening wore on, Isaac found himself relaxing in a way he had not in years. Clara was easy to talk to, her intelligence and warmth drawing out stories and thoughts he had not shared with anyone. She laughed at his description of a bear raid on his food cache, and her laughter was like music. When the fire burned low and the night grew deep, Isaac reluctantly stood to leave. "Thank you for the supper," he said, "and for the bread and socks and everything else. You did not need to do that." "Yes, I did," Clara said, standing as well. She was small next to him, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. "You gave me so much. It was the least I could do." They stood at the door, neither quite wanting the evening to end. Finally, Isaac put on his hat and stepped outside. He turned back to look at her, framed in the doorway by the warm glow of firelight. "I will still clear your path," he said, "if that is all right." "I would like that," Clara said softly. Then, gathering her courage, she added, "And perhaps you could come for supper again, if you wanted to." Isaac felt his heart leap. "I would like that very much." "Next week, then. Same time?" "Next week," Isaac agreed. He walked back into the darkness, and Clara watched until he disappeared into the trees. Then she closed the door and leaned against it, a smile on her face for the first time in months. The next week passed slowly for both of them. Isaac cleared Clara's path each morning, but now he sometimes left small gifts as well. A brace of rabbits, already cleaned. A sack of cornmeal from his supplies. Once, a book he had owned for years, a collection of poetry that he thought she might enjoy. Clara prepared for their next supper with nervous excitement. She made a better meal this time, trading some of her laundry work for ingredients. She wanted to show him that she could do more than survive, that she had skills and grace despite her circumstances. When Isaac arrived, he brought her a gift as well. It was a pair of fur-lined gloves, beautifully made, soft and warm. "I made them," he said, almost shyly. "I thought your hands might be cold." Clara took them, her eyes widening. They were clearly made with skill and care, the stitching perfect, the fur thick and luxurious. "You made these?" she asked in wonder. "I do a lot of leather work," Isaac said. "Have to, living like I do." "Thought you could use them." Clara slipped them on and they fit perfectly. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "They are beautiful, thank you." That supper was even better than the first. They talked more easily now, sharing stories and laughter. Isaac told her about growing up in Boston, about the pressure from his father to become someone he was not. Clara told him about her marriage, about how she had loved her husband, but also how she had sometimes resented the choices he made that left her in this position. "Does that make me terrible?" she asked. "To resent him even though he is gone. It makes you honest," Isaac said. "Love is complicated. We can love people and still wish they had done things differently." As the weeks passed, their suppers became a regular occurrence. Once a week, sometimes twice, Isaac would come down from the mountain and share a meal with Clara. He began teaching her things about surviving in the wilderness, about hunting and trapping and reading the signs of weather. She taught him things too, about literature and history, reading to him from her small collection of books. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, their relationship changed. The space between them at the table grew smaller. Their conversations grew deeper and more personal. Isaac found himself thinking about her constantly, planning what he would say the next time he saw her, counting the days until their next supper. Clara caught herself watching the forest during the day, hoping for a glimpse of him, her heart leaping whenever she thought she saw movement in the trees. Spring began to creep into the mountains. The days grew longer, the snow began to melt, and the paths became muddy rather than icy. Isaac still cleared Clara's path, though now he was moving mud and slush rather than snow. One evening in early April, as they sat by her fire after supper, Clara found the courage to ask the question that had been weighing on her mind. "What will you do when summer comes? Will you stay in the mountains?" Isaac looked at her, his brown eyes serious. "I do not know," he said honestly. "Usually I go deeper into the wilderness during the warm months, hunting and trapping, building up supplies for winter, but this year—" He trailed off. "This year?" Clara prompted, her heart pounding. "This year I find I do not want to be so far away," Isaac admitted. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand in his. His hand was large and calloused, warm and strong. "Clara, these months of knowing you have been the happiest I have had in years. I do not want that to end." Clara's breath caught. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. "I do not want it to end either," she whispered. "Isaac, I need to tell you something. When my husband died, I thought I would never feel anything again. I thought I would just survive, just exist until I could not anymore. But you changed that. You made me feel alive again. You made me feel like maybe there was still joy to be found in this world." Isaac squeezed her hand gently. "I was alone for so long because I chose to be," he said. "I thought being alone was safer than risking disappointment, but knowing you has taught me that some things are worth the risk." "What things?" Clara asked, though she thought she knew. "Love," Isaac said simply. "I am in love with you, Clara. I think I have been since that first morning I saw you fighting the snow. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too," she said. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself, but I do. I love you, Isaac." Isaac reached up with his free hand and gently wiped away her tears. Then, slowly, he leaned down and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, and Clara felt something in her chest unfurl, something she had thought was dead forever. When they pulled apart, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know I am not much, just a mountain man with a rough cabin and a hard life. But I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never have to struggle alone again. I will clear every path for you, Clara. I will stand between you and anything that tries to hurt you. I will love you with everything I have." Clara laughed through her tears, joy flooding through her. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married a month later in the small church in Salida. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, which she had kept carefully packed away, and Isaac wore a new suit he bought specifically for the occasion, though he looked uncomfortable in it. The ceremony was simple, attended by only a handful of people, but Clara had never felt happier. After the wedding, Isaac moved Clara out of her small cabin and into his larger one higher up the mountain. He had spent the weeks before the wedding expanding it, adding a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen, putting in real windows with glass, and building a porch where they could sit in the evenings. It was still a mountain cabin, still rough by civilized standards, but it was sturdy and warm and filled with love. Clara found that she loved the mountain life more than she ever expected. Isaac taught her to hunt and fish, to read the signs of the forest, to move through the wilderness with confidence. She taught him to read better, to appreciate poetry, to talk about his feelings instead of holding everything inside. They balanced each other perfectly, each bringing something the other needed. That summer, Clara started her small school. Several families who lived in the mountains and outer areas around Salida had children who needed education, and Clara offered to teach them. Isaac built her a small schoolhouse near their cabin, and 3 times a week, children would make the trek up the mountain for lessons. It was not much, but it gave Clara a sense of purpose beyond just surviving, and it brought in a little extra money. Isaac continued to trap and hunt, but he also began hiring himself out as a guide for wealthy Easterners who wanted to explore the Colorado wilderness. His knowledge of the mountains and his imposing presence made him a popular choice, and the money he made supplemented their income nicely. As fall came and the leaves began to turn, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. He had been whittling a piece of wood, making a toy for one of her students, and when she told him, he went completely still. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "As certain as I can be," Clara said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby, Isaac." Isaac dropped to his knees in front of her chair and wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing his face against her stomach. Clara felt his shoulders shake and realized he was crying. She ran her fingers through his long hair, her own tears falling freely. "I am going to be a father," he said in wonder. "Clara, I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Clara assured him. The winter that followed was the happiest of Clara's life, despite the cold and snow. Isaac fussed over her constantly, barely letting her lift a finger. He cleared not just their path, but also made sure the path to the schoolhouse was always passable, even building a small sleigh so he could pull her to town when she needed to go. He stocked their cabin with enough food and supplies to last 2 winters, terrified that they might get snowed in when the baby came. Clara found his protectiveness both endearing and occasionally frustrating. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from carrying a bucket of water. "I know," Isaac said, taking the bucket anyway. "But I also know that I love you more than anything in this world, and I am not taking any chances." Their son was born in early spring, during a late snow that blanketed the mountains in white. The midwife from Salida had come up a week earlier and stayed with them, and when the labor started, Isaac paced outside like a caged bear, too anxious to sit still. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he burst through the door, his eyes wild with worry until he saw Clara sitting up in bed, tired but smiling, holding a small bundle. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Isaac approached the bed carefully, as if afraid he might break something. When Clara pulled back the blanket to show him the baby's face, he felt his breath catch. His son was tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and his eyes squeezed shut against the world. "Can I hold him?" Isaac asked, his voice barely a whisper. Clara carefully transferred the baby into Isaac's large arms. He looked impossibly small cradled against Isaac's broad chest, but Isaac held him with a gentleness that made Clara's heart swell. "What should we name him?" Clara asked. They had discussed this before, tossing around various names. But now, looking at his son, Isaac knew. "James," he said. "James Henry Orion. James for strength, Henry for home." "James Henry," Clara repeated, smiling. "It is perfect." Raising a baby in the mountains was not easy, but Isaac and Clara managed it together. Isaac proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, waking up with James in the night so Clara could sleep. carrying him in a sling on his chest as he did his work, talking to him constantly, even though the baby could not understand. As James grew into a toddler and then a young boy, Isaac taught him about the wilderness, about tracking and hunting and respecting the land. Clara taught him to read and write, to think and question, to treat others with kindness. Together, they raised a son who was strong and smart and loving. 3 years after James was born, Clara gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas and Eleanor. The cabin, which had seemed spacious, suddenly felt crowded, so Isaac built an addition, working through the summer to give them more room. The twins were as different as night and day, Thomas quiet and thoughtful like his mother, Eleanor wild and fearless like her father. Life in the mountains was hard work, but it was good work. Every morning, Isaac still cleared the paths around their home, though now he had help from James, who followed his father everywhere with a small shovel of his own. Clara continued teaching, her school growing as word spread about the excellent education children received there. They were not wealthy by any means, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. As the years passed, Isaac and Clara watched their children grow. James became tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet confidence and skill in the wilderness. He eventually became a guide like Isaac, leading expeditions through the Colorado mountains. Thomas surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for business, eventually moving to Salida to open a trading post that became quite successful. Eleanor, true to her wild nature, became a skilled horsewoman and horse trader, earning respect in a profession dominated by men. Through it all, Isaac and Clara remained as in love as they had been that first spring when he kissed her by the fire. They had their disagreements, of course, their moments of frustration and anger, but they always worked through them, always came back to the love that had brought them together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Isaac took Clara on a long walk through the mountains, just the two of them. The children were all grown now, living their own lives, though they visited often. Isaac led Clara to a spot high up on the mountain, where the view stretched for miles in every direction. "You remember the first time I saw you?" Isaac asked as they stood looking out over the valley. "You mean the first time I saw you," Clara corrected with a smile. "That morning when you cleared my path." "I saw you before that," Isaac admitted. "Watched you struggling in the snow, watched you refuse to give up. I fell in love with you in that moment, Clara. Before I even knew your name, I knew you were special." Clara leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders. "I felt so alone then," she said. "So lost and afraid. And then suddenly, someone was taking care of me. Someone I could not see, could not thank, but who was there every single morning. You saved my life, Isaac, not just by clearing the snow, but by giving me hope." "You saved mine too," Isaac said. "I did not even know how lonely I was until I met you. You taught me that being strong does not mean being alone. That letting someone in, loving someone, is not weakness but the bravest thing we can do." They stood there for a long time, watching the sun set over the mountains. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life filled with love and purpose. As they grew older, Isaac's hair turned gray and his face lined with age, but he remained strong, his body still powerful from a lifetime of hard work. Clara's hair turned white, and her hands developed arthritis that made fine work difficult, but her mind remained sharp and her spirit undiminished. They moved a bit slower now, needed a bit more rest, but they still walked their mountain paths together, still sat on their porch in the evenings talking and laughing. Their grandchildren came to visit often, filling the cabin with noise and energy. Isaac taught them to track and hunt, to respect the wilderness. Clara read to them, told them stories, taught them their letters. They were good children, raised by good parents, and Isaac and Clara were proud of the family they had created. One winter evening, when Isaac was in his 60s and Clara was 60, they sat by their fire as they had done thousands of times before. Snow was falling outside, thick and heavy, covering their world in white. Isaac had cleared the paths that morning, as he still did, though James now helped him more often than not. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked suddenly. "Marrying me, living up here instead of in town where life would have been easier?" Clara looked at him in surprise. "Regret it?" "Isaac, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. This life, this beautiful, hard, wonderful life we built together, it is everything I never knew I wanted." "I just want you to be happy," Isaac said. "That was always all I wanted. From that first morning when I cleared your path, all I wanted was to make your life easier, to take away your struggles." "You did," Clara said, reaching over to take his hand. "Not by making my life easy, but by walking through it beside me. Every struggle was easier because I did not face it alone. Every joy was sweeter because I had you to share it with." Isaac raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every single moment." "So would I," Clara agreed. They sat together in comfortable silence, the fire crackling, the snow falling outside their windows. Two people who had found each other in the wilderness and built a love that lasted a lifetime. Years continued to pass. Isaac eventually needed a cane to walk the mountain paths, but he still went out every day, refusing to let age slow him down too much. Clara's school closed when she could no longer make the walk reliably, but former students, now parents themselves, came to visit and thank her for the education she had given them. On a spring morning when Isaac was 72 and Clara was 70, they took a walk together along the path Isaac had cleared so many times. The snow was melting, revealing the first green shoots of new growth. They walked slowly, hand in hand, stopping often to rest and admire the view. "I have been thinking," Clara said as they sat on a fallen log, "about that first winter, about how desperate I was, how lost. If someone had told me then that I would spend the next 40-some years in these mountains, happy and loved, I would have thought they were mad." "Life is strange that way," Isaac agreed. "We never know where it will lead us." "I am glad it led me to you," Clara said. "And I am glad it led me to you," Isaac said. "Every path I ever walked, every choice I ever made led me to that moment when I saw you in the snow. And every moment since has been a gift." They sat together until the sun was high overhead, then slowly made their way back to their cabin. James was there waiting with his wife and children, ready to help with whatever needed doing. Their family had grown large and loving, a testament to the life Isaac and Clara had built together. As the years continued, Isaac and Clara grew more frail. They spent more time in their cabin, less time roaming the mountains, but their love never diminished. Isaac still looked at Clara with the same wonder he had felt that first evening when she invited him to supper. Clara still felt her heart skip when Isaac smiled at her. When Isaac was 78, he became ill with pneumonia. Clara nursed him through it, sitting by his bedside day and night, refusing to leave him. Their children came, filling the cabin with worried faces. But Isaac was strong and he pulled through, though the illness left him weaker than before. "You cannot leave me yet," Clara told him one night as he recovered. "We still have more paths to walk together." "I am not going anywhere," Isaac promised, though they both knew that eventually that was a promise he would not be able to keep. They had 5 more good years together. Years of watching grandchildren grow, of quiet evenings by the fire, of shared memories and gentle touches. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by 3 generations of family. the cabin overflowing with love and laughter. Isaac passed away peacefully in his sleep one winter night, with Clara beside him as she had been for over 50 years. He was 83 years old. Clara woke to find him gone, his hand still in hers, a peaceful expression on his weathered face. She sat with him for a long time, tears streaming down her face, but also smiling because she knew he had lived a full and happy life, that he had loved and been loved in return. The funeral was well attended, people coming from all over the region to pay their respects to the mountain man who had been so kind, so strong, so devoted to his family. He was buried on the mountain he loved, with a view of the valley below. Clara lived for 3 more years after Isaac's death. She stayed in their cabin, surrounded by memories, visited often by her children and grandchildren. She told them stories about Isaac, about their life together, about the love they had shared. She wanted them to remember not just the man, but the love story, the proof that real and lasting love was possible. On a morning in early spring, when the snow was just beginning to melt and the paths were becoming muddy, Clara passed away in her sleep. She was 86 years old. Her family found her with a smile on her face, and they knew she had gone to be with Isaac. They buried her beside him on the mountain, and at her funeral, James told the story one more time. The story of how his father had found his mother sweeping snow from her path, how he had cleared it daily so she would never have to struggle, how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into a love that shaped all their lives. The cabin still stands on the mountain, maintained by their descendants as a reminder of Isaac and Clara Orion. And on the path leading to it, you can sometimes see people pause, thinking about the mountain man who loved a woman enough to clear her path every single day, and the woman who loved him back with equal devotion. Their story became legend in Salida, a reminder that true love still exists, that kindness matters, and that the simplest acts can change everything in the end. Isaac and Clara's legacy was not just their children or their cabin, or the paths Isaac cleared. It was the love they shared, the example they set, the proof they provided that two people who find each other against all odds can build something beautiful and lasting. Their story lived on in the hearts of everyone who knew them, a testament to the power of love, devotion, and never giving up, even when the path ahead seems impossibly hard. The snow still falls on the mountains around Salida every winter, covering the paths and making travel difficult. But somewhere in those mountains, the spirit of a mountain man still watches over those he loves, and the spirit of a woman who found hope in the darkest winter still believes in the power of kindness. And their love, that deep and abiding love that sustained them through 50 years of joy and hardship, remains as permanent and enduring as the mountains themselves. Their great-grandchildren still tell the story, passing it down through generations. They speak of how Isaac would wake before dawn every day to clear Clara's path, how that simple act of service became the foundation of a love that transformed both their lives. They tell how Clara's courage in inviting Isaac to supper, in taking a chance on love again after loss, led to a family that now spans generations. They remind each other that love is not just a feeling but a choice, an action, a daily commitment to show up for the person you love no matter what. The trading post that Thomas Orion opened in Salida eventually grew into a successful business that lasted for 3 generations. Aliner's horse ranch became known throughout Colorado for producing some of the finest horses in the state. James continued guiding in the mountains until he was well into his 60s, following in his father's footsteps and teaching others to love and respect the wilderness. But more than the businesses or the wealth or the success, What Isaac and Clara left behind was a family that understood the value of hard work, of kindness, of standing by the people you love even when times are tough. They showed their children and grandchildren that the best things in life are not given but earned, that love is not passive but active, and that every day offers an opportunity to show someone they matter. On winter mornings, when the snow falls heavy on the Colorado mountains and the paths become difficult to pass, people in Salida sometimes think of Isaac Orion, clearing the snow for a woman he had not yet met, asking nothing in return. They think of Clara Owens, struggling through that terrible winter, finding hope in the kindness of a stranger. And they remember that the most profound love stories often start with the simplest gestures. The path from Clara's old cabin still exists, though it has grown over with vegetation in the decades since she left it. But if you know where to look, you can still see where Isaac widened it, where he carved steps into the hillside to make her walk easier, where he built small bridges over streams so she would not have to jump across. Each of these small improvements was an act of love, a physical manifestation of his devotion. The schoolhouse Clara built still stands as well, now preserved as a historical site. Inside, you can see the benches Isaac made for the students, the chalkboard he installed, the bookshelf he built to hold Clara's collection of books. Visitors read the letters from former students, now long gone themselves, thanking Mrs. Orion for the education she provided, for believing in them, for opening up worlds through books and learning. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the legend of Isaac and Clara Orion became woven into the fabric of Salida's history. Local historians documented their story, interviewed descendants, preserved photographs and letters. But more than just a historical curiosity, their story became a touchstone for anyone who believed in true love, in the power of kindness, in the idea that you can find your person even in the most unexpected circumstances. Young couples getting married in Salida often visit the graves of Isaac and Clara, a tradition that started no one knows quite when. They lay flowers and make wishes, asking for a love as strong and enduring as the one the mountain man and his wife shared. On Valentine's Day, the graves are covered in roses, tokens from people who believe in their story, who want to honor what they built together. The mountains around Salida are still wild and beautiful, still covered in snow every winter, still home to bears and elk, and the kind of solitude that Isaac once sought. But they are also home to the memory of a love story that proves civilization and wildness do not have to be at odds, that a man can be both strong and gentle, that a woman can be both refined and resilient. In the end, Isaac Orion cleared more than just a path for Clara. He cleared a way forward, a way out of despair and into hope. And Clara gave Isaac more than just her love. She gave him connection, purpose, a reason to be part of the world again instead of just observing it from a distance. Together, they built something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes, something that continues to inspire and uplift everyone who hears their story. The snow falls every winter in Salida, Colorado, covering paths and making travel difficult. But now, when people clear their own paths or help a neighbor with theirs, sometimes they think of Isaac Orion and the love story that started with such a simple act of kindness. And they remember that the most extraordinary things often begin with ordinary gestures, that love is not found but built, one cleared path, one shared meal, one quiet evening at a time. This is the legacy of the mountain man and the woman he loved, a reminder that in a world that can be harsh and unforgiving, kindness matters, love endures, and sometimes the most important thing we can do is clear the path for someone who is struggling, asking nothing in return except the joy of making their journey a little easier.